Michael Jordan's SUV glided to a stop in the parking lot of Emsley, Laney High School. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows over the familiar brick building. It had been decades since he'd walked these halls, since he had been just another kid with a dream too big for his small hometown. He sat for a moment, gripping the steering wheel, his heartbeat steady but expectant. "You sure you want to do this, Mr. Jordan?" his driver asked, glancing over from the passenger seat. Michael exhaled, nodding. "Sometimes, you need to remember where you started to understand where you've ended up." Stepping out, he adjusted his cap lower over his eyes. Maybe he could slip in unnoticed, soak in the memories before anyone realized who he was. The entrance doors were different now, modernized, but the school colors were the same. The halls stretched before him, echoing with whispers of the past. He passed trophy cases filled with old newspaper clippings, grainy photographs, and a framed jersey bearing his number. He hadn't been back in almost a decade. Then the gym. As soon as he pushed open the heavy double doors, a familiar scent hit him. A mixture of sweat, floor polish, and rubber. The same in every gym across America. But something was different. The bleachers were new, the scoreboard digital, and on one towering wall, a mural of himself soaring through the air in a Bulls uniform. Beneath it, bold letters read, "Believe in your dreams." "Well, that's new," he muttered. The gym wasn't empty. A girls' volleyball team practiced at one end, their coach barking instructions. They didn't notice the legend standing just inside the doorway. Michael walked along the edge of the court, his mind flooding with memories. This was where he'd been cut from the varsity team. This was where he'd spent hours alone, perfecting his jump shot, vowing to never be doubted again. Then he saw him. An old man moved slowly along the bleachers, pushing a dust mop across the gleaming hardwood. His steps were careful, deliberate. The uniform, blue work pants, gray shirt with the school's logo stitched above the pocket, was the same as it had always been. His back was slightly bent, his hair white as snow, but something about the way he moved, the quiet dignity in his work, was unmistakable. Michael's throat tightened. "Excuse me," he said, approaching. The old man looked up, squinting. "Gym's closed for volleyball practice, sir, unless you're here for one of the girls." Michael swallowed hard. "No, I'm just visiting. I used to go to school here." The janitor nodded. "A lot of folks come back. Must have been a while if I don't recognize you." "Class of '81. The old man let out a low whistle. "That's going back some years. I was already working here then." Michael studied him closely. Then it hit him. "Mr. Wilson?" The janitor tilted his head, studying Michael's face. "Do I know you, son?" Michael took a step closer. "It's me. Mike. Michael Jordan." For a moment, Mr. Wilson just stared. Then his eyes widened. He leaned his mop against the wall and stepped forward. "Little Mike Jordan." Michael grinned. "Not so little anymore, Mr. Wilson." "Well, I'll be." Mr. Wilson shook his head in disbelief, then hesitated before extending his hand. "Pardon me for not recognizing you right away. These old eyes ain't what they used to be." Instead of shaking his hand, Michael pulled him into a hug. He felt frail in his arms, lighter than he remembered. When they stepped back, Michael saw the moisture in the old man's eyes. "I can't believe you're still working here," Michael said, glancing at the mop. "It's been over 40 years. 47 next month," Mr. Wilson said with a small nod. Michael blinked. 47 years. "How old are you now?" "Just turned 80 last week." 80. And still mopping floors. "You still working full-time?" "Got nowhere else to be." Mr. Wilson shrugged. "School still needs cleaning." Michael felt something deep in his chest tighten. He remembered how Mr. Wilson used to unlock the gym early so he could practice, how he stayed late, never complaining when Michael asked for just 5 more minutes, how he always had a quiet word of encouragement when nothing seemed to be going right. "You remember how you used to let me in early to practice?" Michael asked. A slow smile spread across the old man's face. "Sure do. You were always first one in, last one out. Had to practically kick you out so I could go home for dinner." Michael chuckled. "My mom used to get so mad at me for coming home late." Mr. Wilson gestured toward the mural. "Looks like it paid off." The volleyball coach blew her whistle. The practice was ending, players gathering their bags. Mr. Wilson reached for his mop. "I should finish up. Still got the hallways to do before I clock out." Michael hesitated, then said, "What time do you finish?" 6, usually." You think we could catch up when you're done? Maybe grab some dinner. Mr. Wilson looked surprised. You want to have dinner with me? Michael put a hand on his shoulder. Mr. Wilson, right now, you're the most important person I want to see. A slow smile crept onto the old man's face. Well then, I accept. But nothing fancy. These old bones don't fit so well in fancy chairs anymore. I know just the place. As Michael walked back through the halls, his mind was racing. Mr. Wilson had always been old in his teenage eyes, but now, at 80, he was still pushing a mop across these floors. Something about that didn't sit right. By the time he reached his car, Michael Jordan, the man known for his relentless drive and fierce determination, had made a decision. He didn't know exactly what he was going to do yet, but he knew one thing for certain. Mr. Wilson's life was about to change. Michael stepped into the small living room, and Mr. Wilson's eyes lit up. That's right, the old janitor said, a warm smile spreading across his face. Your daddy and I put up a new one. Use marine plywood, so it'd last through the rain. It's still there, Michael said, feeling a wave of nostalgia. My brother told me the new owners kept it. Martha, Mr. Wilson's wife, reached for an old scrapbook and carefully flipped it open. James has followed your whole career, she said softly. Michael leaned in, his eyes scanning the pages filled with carefully preserved newspaper clippings. High school game reports, college highlights, NBA draft news, championship celebrations, even old advertisements featuring him. I always knew you'd do something special, Mr. Wilson said, his voice thick with pride. You had that look in your eye, that hunger. Not everyone saw it. Michael murmured. Well, some people need glasses, Mr. Wilson chuckled. Laughter filled the room, warm and familiar. Michael sipped his coffee, but the warmth he felt wasn't from the drink. It was from being here, in this small, worn house, with someone who had believed in him long before the world knew his name. As the evening stretched on, they shared more stories. Mr. Wilson talked about the countless students he had quietly helped over the years. The girl who forgot her science project, and he let her in early to finish it. The boy who couldn't afford a prom suit, so Mr. Wilson gave him his own. Why did you do all that? Michael asked. It wasn't your job to help us kids. Mr. Wilson thought for a moment, then shrugged. Maybe not, he said, but everybody needs someone in their corner, especially young folks trying to find their way. I was just in the right place at the right time. By the time Michael checked his watch, it was nearly midnight. I should let you both get some rest, he said, standing up. Will you be in town long? Martha asked. I was supposed to leave tomorrow, Michael admitted, but I think I'll stay a few more days. At the door, he shook Mr. Wilson's hand firmly. Thank you, he said, for everything, not just tonight, but back then. You don't owe me a thing, Mr. Wilson insisted. I'm just glad to see you doing so well. Michael stepped outside, but before getting into his car, he took one last glance at the house. The cracked ceiling, the uneven floors, the too narrow bathroom doorway, the medical supplies stacked in the corner. Things he hadn't noticed before. On the drive back to his hotel, he couldn't stop thinking about the Wilsons. How many students had Mr. Wilson helped in his 47 years at Laney High? How many young lives had he shaped, expecting nothing in return? And now, at 80 years old, he was still mopping floors while his wife struggled with health issues in a house that was falling apart around them. It didn't seem right. It didn't seem fair. By the time Michael reached his hotel room, he had made a decision. But as he sat on the edge of the bed, that decision grew into a plan that would require resources, discretion, and perfect timing. He picked up his phone and started making calls. The next morning, Michael called Laney High School. Good morning, Laney High, a young voice answered. I'd like to speak with James Wilson, please. The janitor? Hold on. A few minutes later, Mr. Wilson's familiar voice came on the line. Hello. Mr. Wilson, it's Michael Jordan. Well, this is a nice surprise. Mr. Wilson sounded genuinely pleased. Martha and I were just talking about your visit last night. Made us both feel young again. Michael smiled. I was wondering if I could drive you home after work today, he said. I'd love to take some photos of that scrapbook of yours, if that's okay. Well, sure, Mr. Wilson said, sounding surprised but happy. I get off at 6. I'll be there, Michael promised. After hanging up, he spent the rest of the day making more calls, to his business manager, to his lawyer, to a contractor in Wilmington, to an old friend in healthcare. By 5:45, Michael was parked outside Laney High waiting. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the parking lot as students streamed out of the building, laughing and shouting to each other. At 6:05, Mr. Wilson appeared, looking tired after a full day's work. "Hope I didn't keep you waiting," he said as he climbed into the SUV. "Not at all," Michael replied. "How was your day?" "Same as always," Mr. Wilson said with a sigh. "Spills to clean, papers to pick up, bathroom toilet overflowed again in the science wing." Michael winced. At 80, you shouldn't be dealing with overflowing toilets. Mr. Wilson just shrugged. "It's all part of the job." As they drove, Michael casually asked about the house. "How long have you and Martha lived there?" 35 years, Mr. Wilson said. "Bought it when prices were low. Couldn't afford anything like it now." "And repairs?" Michael prompted. "Oh, always something. Roof leaks when it rains hard. Plumbing's old. We've been meaning to widen the bathroom door for Martha's wheelchair, but—" His voice trailed off. "But what?" "Money's tight," Mr. Wilson admitted. "Between Martha's medication and regular bills, there's just not much left." When they arrived, Michael saw the house in daylight for the first time. The sagging gutters, the cracked concrete path, the wooden ramp over the front steps, already showing signs of rot. Martha greeted them at the door, her face lighting up. "What a lovely surprise," she exclaimed. "I thought James was making up stories when he said you might come back today." Inside, Michael took photos of the scrapbook while quietly observing the house. The too narrow hallway, the bathroom Martha couldn't access without help, the hospital bed in the dining room with a thin mattress on the floor beside it. "James couldn't fit in the hospital bed with me," Martha explained when she saw him looking. "And our old bed was too high for me to get into safely. So he sleeps on the floor?" Michael asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "It's just temporary," Mr. Wilson said quickly, "until we figure something else out." Michael swallowed hard. This proud man, who had spent his life helping others, was sleeping on the floor at 80 years old. After an hour, Michael stood to leave. "I should get going," he said, "but I think I'll be staying in Wilmington a bit longer. I have some business to take care of." At the door, Mr. Wilson shook his hand. "It means a lot that you took time to visit," he said. "Most folks from your world don't look back once they make it big." Michael met his eyes. "You're important to me, Mr. Wilson," he said simply. "More than you know." Back in his car, Michael scrolled through the photos he had taken. The house, the scrapbook, the mattress on the floor. Each image strengthened his resolve. He picked up his phone. "I need you to pick me up at the Wilson house," he told his driver. "And bring my laptop. We have work to do." This wasn't just about fixing a house. It was about changing a life. And Michael Jordan was just getting started. Michael stood at the front of the room as the team gathered, reviewing the initial renovation plans. What had started as a simple project quickly evolved as ideas poured in. "The roof needs to be replaced entirely," one contractor noted. "We should upgrade the electrical system while we're at it," another added. "What about the garden?" The interior designer chimed in. "Martha used to love gardening before her stroke. Could we create raised beds she could reach from her wheelchair?" Ideas flowed freely, the energy in the room building with every suggestion. Michael watched in satisfaction as his team took shape, each person bringing their unique skills and perspectives to the challenge. "What's our timeline?" Dave finally asked. Michael clicked to a new slide, revealing a detailed, day-by-day schedule. "Tomorrow, I'll invite the Wilsons to a special week-long basketball camp reunion at the beach. That's our window to complete the major renovations. They'll move into the beach house Friday morning. By the time they return, their home will be completely transformed. Everyone here needs to be ready to start work as soon as they're gone." He assigned team leaders for different aspects of the project: construction, healthcare, interior design, landscaping, and financial arrangements. "Any questions?" he asked. A young contractor in the back raised his hand. "Mr. Jordan, I just want to say my grandpa was a school janitor for 30 years. No one ever did anything like this for him. What you're doing, it matters." The room murmured in agreement. Several people had tears in their eyes. Michael nodded, his own throat tightening. "It does matter. People like Mr. Wilson matter. They change lives every day without recognition or reward. It's time someone changed their lives for once." As the meeting broke into smaller groups, Michael stepped back, watching the energy in the room. It reminded him of the feeling on the court during championship games. The thrill of working together for something bigger than yourself. His phone buzzed. A text from Scotty. Flight lands tomorrow at noon. Bringing 2 more guys from the old team. They want to help too. Asterisk asterisk. Michael smiled. His team was growing stronger by the minute. A tap on his shoulder interrupted his thoughts. Dave stood there, holding a set of blueprints. We'll make this happen, Mr. Jordan, he said firmly. For Mr. Wilson, and for every unsung hero out there who deserves more than they got. Michael nodded. In 10 days, the Wilsons' lives will be completely different. What he didn't say, what he was only beginning to realize, was that his own life was changing too. The next morning, Michael called Mr. Wilson at school. Mr. Wilson, it's Michael Jordan again. Michael, you're still in town. I am. And I have a surprise for you and Martha. I'm hosting a small reunion dinner tonight. Some of my old teammates and coaches from Laney. I'd be honored if you and Martha would join us. There was a pause. That's mighty kind of you. But Martha gets tired easily these days. Going out can be difficult with her wheelchair. I've arranged for a car service with wheelchair access, Michael said quickly. And the restaurant is fully accessible. I made sure of it. After a moment's hesitation, Mr. Wilson agreed. Martha will be thrilled. What time should we be ready? The car will pick you up at 6. And Mr. Wilson, it's just casual dress. Nothing fancy. After hanging up, Michael called the restaurant to confirm every detail. The private dining room was ready, the menu customized for any dietary needs. He texted Scotty. Dinner at 7 o'clock. Bring Dennis and Steve. No flashy clothes. Try not to overwhelm them. Asterisk asterisk. As the day passed, everything came together. Dave and his team were already ordering materials and scheduling workers. The healthcare team was arranging for Martha's new equipment. The financial team was setting up the trust fund that would secure their future. At 6:45, Michael arrived at the restaurant. The private room was set with a round table, so everyone could talk easily. A few minutes later, Scotty walked in with Dennis Rodman and Steve Kerr, all dressed simply, just as Michael had asked. Thanks for coming, guys, Michael said as they shared handshakes and hugs. You said this janitor was important to you, Scotty replied. That's all we needed to know. At exactly 7 o'clock, the restaurant manager escorted the Wilsons into the room. Mr. Wilson wore a clean button-up shirt and slacks. Martha was in a floral dress, her silver hair neatly styled. Michael, Martha exclaimed. Then her eyes widened as she recognized the men around the table. Oh my goodness, James, do you know who these people are? Mr. Wilson stared in disbelief. I sure do. Watched every game they played together. Michael stepped forward. Mr. and Mrs. Wilson, I'd like you to meet some friends of mine, Scottie Pippen, Dennis Rodman, and Steve Kerr. Each man shook Mr. Wilson's hand and bent down to greet Martha warmly. James has every game you played on VHS tapes, Martha told them. Wore them out rewatching them. Mrs. Wilson makes me call her Martha, Michael explained with a grin. And Mr. Wilson is the man I was telling you about. The one who unlocked the gym for me every morning so I could practice. Then we owe you a huge thank you, sir, Scotty said. Without those early practice sessions, this guy might never have been good enough to help us win championships. Mr. Wilson shook his head. Michael did all the work. I just unlocked a door. Sometimes that's all someone needs, Steve said quietly. An open door. A chance. Throughout dinner, the conversation flowed effortlessly. The basketball players shared championship stories. Mr. Wilson talked about watching their games and how the whole school buzzed a day after a big Bulls win. As dessert was served, Michael leaned forward. I have another surprise for both of you, he said. I'm hosting a special week-long reunion at a beach house for some Laney alumni. It starts Friday. That sounds lovely, but we couldn't possibly. Martha began. I've already cleared it with Principal Jenkins, Michael interrupted. He's giving Mr. Wilson the week off, with pay. And the beach house is fully accessible for you, Martha. The Wilsons exchanged uncertain glances. It's all expenses paid, Michael continued. Transportation, food, everything. It's my way of saying thank you. That's very generous, but we'll all be there too. Scotty jumped in. It wouldn't be the same without you. When was the last time you had a vacation? Steve asked gently. Martha looked at her husband. It has been a long time, James. Michael smiled. The car will pick you up Friday morning. Just pack some clothes and any medications you need. Everything else is taken care of. By the end of the night, the Wilsons agreed. As they prepared to leave, Martha reached for Michael's hand. "Thank you for a wonderful evening," she said. "It means so much that you remembered James after all these years." Michael squeezed her hand gently. "Some people you never forget, Martha." Outside, as the Wilsons' car pulled away, Michael's teammates stood beside him. "They have no idea what's coming, do they?" Steve asked quietly. Michael shook his head. "Not a clue. When they see what you're doing to their house," Dennis whistled low. "It's not just about the house," Michael said. "It's about giving them the life they deserve." Scotty put a hand on his shoulder. "I've never seen you like this before." "Like what?" "At peace," Scotty said simply. "Like you found something that matters more than winning." Michael watched the taillights disappear around the corner. In 2 days, the Wilsons would leave for their beach vacation, and the real work would begin. Michael stood in what would soon be James and Martha Wilson's transformed bedroom, watching his healthcare specialist discuss the placement of medical equipment. "The adjustable bed should go here," one of them pointed, "and we'll need outlets for our medical devices along this wall." Michael nodded, taking it all in. "What about therapy equipment?" he asked. Martha mentioned insurance only covered a few physical therapy sessions. "We've got that covered," the specialist assured him. "We're setting up a small therapy area in the spare room. It'll have everything she needs for her exercises, plus some new equipment that might help her regain more mobility." By midday, more neighbors had gathered to watch the renovation unfold. Some brought food for the workers, while others offered to help with small tasks. What had started as Michael's private project was quickly turning into a community effort. An elderly woman approached as Michael inspected the newly installed roof. "I've lived across the street from James and Martha for 30 years, she said. "Never seen anything like this. It's like one of those TV shows where they rebuild someone's house." Michael smiled. "Something like that. He deserves it, you know," she continued. "James Wilson is the finest man in this neighborhood. Always the first to help when someone needs it. When my husband passed, James mowed my lawn for 2 straight months, without ever being asked." Throughout the day, similar stories emerged. The mail carrier who remembered James shoveling snow for elderly neighbors. The young mother whose broken-down car he had fixed when she desperately needed to get her baby to the doctor. The teenager whose sports equipment he had secretly paid for when his family couldn't afford it. Each story strengthened Michael's resolve. This wasn't just about repaying a personal debt. It was about honoring a lifetime of quiet generosity. That evening, Michael and Scott drove back to the beach house, where the Wilsons were still enjoying their unexpected vacation. Inside, James was deep in conversation with an old friend, Bill, whom he had just discovered had served in the same military unit as him, just a few years apart. "Small world," Michael said, shaking Bill's hand. Later, during dinner, Michael's phone buzzed with updates from the renovation site. He checked them discreetly, smiling at the latest photos. The new roof was finished, and the foundation for the wheelchair ramp was drying in the afternoon sun. "Everything okay?" Martha asked, noticing his distraction. "Just some business stuff," Michael assured her. "Nothing that can't wait." After dinner, the group gathered in the living room to watch a basketball game. As Mr. Wilson analyzed the plays, explaining each strategy in detail, Michael was impressed. "You really understand basketball," he commented. James shrugged modestly. "Watching from the sidelines all those years, you pick things up. I watched you and your teammates practice every day." Michael's chest tightened at the memory. Back then, James was just the janitor. But in reality, he had been so much more. Later that night, Michael took a call on the deck, staring out at the waves as Dave gave him the latest renovation update. "The interior walls are all framed," Dave reported. "Drywall starts tomorrow morning. Cabinets arrive the day after. We're still on schedule for completion by next Thursday." "Perfect," Michael replied. They returned home Friday morning. When he stepped back inside, he found Martha flipping through a worn photo album. She beckoned him over, pointing to a yellowed picture. "Look at this," she said softly. The photo showed a young James Wilson standing in front of Laney High School, a broom in hand, smiling proudly in his janitor's uniform. "He was so happy to get that job," Martha murmured. "His factory had closed, and we had 2 young children to feed. The school job paid less, but it was steady work. He never complained. Not once. For 47 years. Michael studied the photograph. The pride in James' eyes back then was the same pride he carried now, even at 80, still mopping gym floors. He's an extraordinary man, Michael said. Martha nodded, her eyes glistening. I've been blessed to share my life with him. Then she looked at Michael, her voice thick with emotion. Thank you for recognizing that. So many people look right through him because he's just a janitor. Michael's jaw tightened. Not me, he said firmly. Never me. As the days passed, word of the project spread through Wilmington. What had begun as a quiet renovation had captured the community's imagination. Volunteers started showing up at the Wilsons' house, some offering labor, others donating materials. A local flooring company contributed hardwood for the living room. A furniture store replaced the Wilsons' worn-out sofa. High school students painted walls. Even the mayor stopped by, promising to fast-track any necessary permits. One afternoon, a middle-aged woman approached Michael. Mr. Jordan? She asked hesitantly. I'm Susan Matthews. I was a student at Laney when you were there. Mr. Wilson helped me, too. I'd like to contribute something. What did you have in mind? Michael asked. I own a small garden center. Mrs. Wilson loved gardening before her stroke. I'd like to donate plants for their yard. Michael smiled. That would be perfect. We're building raised beds she can reach from her wheelchair. More offers flooded in. A doctor volunteered to review Martha's medical records. A tech company installed a smart home system. High school art students painted a mural. Principal Jenkins arrived with an idea. We'd like to create a display case at school honoring Mr. Wilson's years of service, and start a scholarship in his name for students who show quiet leadership and service. Michael knew James would be embarrassed by the attention, but also deeply moved. As the renovation neared completion, the site took on a festival-like atmosphere. Food trucks served free meals. Local musicians played in the yard. Children made cards for the Wilsons. Scotty arrived from the beach house with an update. The Wilsons are having a great time. We got them scheduled for a spa day tomorrow, so they'll be occupied for hours. Perfect, Michael nodded. The new furniture arrives tomorrow. We'll need space to move everything in. By the final night, every detail had been checked and rechecked. The house had been transformed, not just structurally, but in the smallest ways that made a home. The refrigerator was stocked with their favorite foods. Fresh flowers filled vases. A preloaded music system waited with James' favorite jazz. In the living room, a new glass display case showcased Mr. Wilson's scrapbooks, his legacy, preserved for all to see. As Michael stood outside, surveying the finished home under the glow of streetlights, he exhaled deeply. We did it, Dave said, stepping beside him. Michael nodded. Right on schedule. The house was perfect. But more than that, it was a testament to the lives James and Martha had touched. Now, all that was left was the reveal. At noon the next day, the Wilsons arrived home. As the SUV pulled up, James' face shifted from confusion to awe. Michael stepped forward. Welcome home, Mr. Wilson. James looked around at the crowd, his voice barely above a whisper. What is this? On the other side of the car, two assistants carefully helped Martha into her wheelchair. She blinked in disbelief as she took in the sight of their beautifully restored home. For the first time in his life, James Wilson, who had spent decades quietly serving others, was now the one being honored. And as Michael watched his old mentor's eyes well with tears, he knew that this moment, this single moment, had already changed both of their lives forever. The crowd gathered in front of the Wilsons' home, their voices hushed in anticipation. A bright ribbon stretched across the front door, fluttering gently in the breeze. Martha's eyes darted around, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't understand. Michael placed a reassuring hand on Mr. Wilson's arm, guiding him forward. Come on, let's show you. As they approached the house, Michael addressed them both. While you were away, we worked on a little surprise. He gestured toward the home. Your house needed some repairs, so we took care of them. The Wilsons stood frozen, their eyes wide with disbelief. The peeling paint was gone, replaced by a warm blue hue, the very color Martha had once mentioned loving. The cracked walkway had been transformed into a smooth, welcoming path. The sagging steps had disappeared, replaced by a gently sloping ramp. Mr. Wilson's voice wavered. You fixed our house. That's just the beginning, Michael replied with a smile. Would you like to see inside? Martha nodded, already wiping away tears. Mr. Wilson seemed too overwhelmed to speak. Michael handed him a large pair of scissors. Mr. Wilson, would you do the honors? With trembling hands, Mr. Wilson cut the ribbon. The crowd erupted in quiet applause, many dabbing at their own eyes. Michael pushed the door open, revealing the transformed interior. The Wilsons gasped in unison. Where there had once been narrow doorways and cramped spaces, there was now an open, airy floor plan. Natural light poured in through brand-new windows. The old, worn carpet had been replaced by gleaming hardwood floors, perfect for Martha's wheelchair. "Oh my goodness," Martha whispered, her hands covering her mouth. Michael gently guided them forward. "Everything has been redesigned to make life easier for both of you." He led them through the house, showing them the custom kitchen with lower countertops and easy-to-reach appliances. The bathroom, now equipped with a roll-in shower and safety features. The bedroom, with a new adjustable bed, finally allowing them to sleep side by side again. Mr. Wilson shook his head in disbelief. This can't be real." "It's real," Michael assured him. In the living room, he pointed to a special display case built just for Mr. Wilson's cherished scrapbooks. "Your collection deserves a proper home," he said. Martha wheeled herself closer, emotion overwhelming her. She reached for Michael's hand. "I can reach everything," she marveled, opening cabinets and drawers that had once been impossible for her. Mr. Wilson turned in slow circles, taking it all in. "Why?" he finally asked, his voice raw. "Why would you do all this?" Michael placed a hand on his shoulder. "Because you changed my life, Mr. Wilson." His voice softened. "The day I got cut from varsity, I was ready to quit. But you believed in me when no one else did." Mr. Wilson swallowed hard. "I just unlocked a door." "Sometimes, that's all someone needs," Michael replied. He guided them toward the back of the house. "There's more." Outside, the backyard had been transformed into a peaceful retreat, complete with raised garden beds that Martha could tend from her wheelchair and a covered patio perfect for morning coffee. But Michael wasn't done yet. He led them back inside to the dining table, where a folder waited. "This house isn't just fixed up," he said gently. "It's yours. Free and clear. The mortgage is paid in full." Martha gasped. Mr. Wilson's hands trembled as he opened the folder, staring at the documents in shock. Michael continued. "We've also set up a trust fund. You'll receive a monthly income for the rest of your lives. Enough for you to retire, Mr. Wilson. And all of your medical expenses will be covered. No more worrying about insurance or out-of-pocket costs." Mr. Wilson collapsed into a chair, overwhelmed. "This is too much," he whispered. "It's not enough," Michael countered. "Not for everything you've given to so many people." Through the window, the Wilsons saw the growing crowd outside. Former students, neighbors, people whose lives Mr. Wilson had touched. "These people aren't here for me," Michael said softly. "They're here for you." Right on cue, the front door opened. One by one, people stepped inside, each carrying cards, small gifts, or simply stories. "Mr. Wilson changed my life," a middle-aged man said. "When I was failing school, he stayed late every day to help me study. He bought my son his first pair of basketball shoes when we couldn't afford them," a woman added. "He never told anyone, but we never forgot." More stories followed. A lifetime of kindness, finally acknowledged. Martha squeezed her husband's hand. "I always knew you were changing lives," she whispered. "Now, everyone else knows too." Outside, the celebration continued. Students held signs thanking Mr. Wilson. The school band played a cheerful tune. The Wilsons were surrounded by love. And through it all, Michael Jordan, the global icon, the billionaire businessman, stood quietly in the background, watching. As the evening faded, the crowd thinned. Mr. Wilson found Michael on the patio, folding chairs. "Can we talk?" "Of course." They walked to the old oak tree in the yard, settling onto a bench. "I don't know how to thank you," Mr. Wilson admitted. "What you've done, it's beyond anything I could have imagined." "You don't need to thank me," Michael said. "I'm just returning a favor. 40 years overdue." Mr. Wilson sighed, gazing at his transformed home. "Martha told me something earlier. She said, 'James, you've spent your whole life helping others. Now it's your turn to be helped.'" He shook his head. "I've never thought about it that way." "She's a wise woman." Michael smiled. Mr. Wilson nodded. "I never felt like I was doing anything special. Just treating people the way I'd want to be treated. That's what makes it special," Michael said. Martha wheeled over, her movements smooth on the new patio. "There you are. I was wondering where you disappeared to." Mr. Wilson smiled. Just try to find words to thank Michael. Martha reached for Michael's hand. There aren't enough words, she said softly. Michael hesitated, then stood. Actually, there's one more thing. He led them to a small room at the back of the house. Before opening the door, he took a deep breath. When we started this project, it was about fixing your home, but it became something bigger. You inspired everyone working on this. He turned the doorknob. Inside, the once cluttered storage room had been transformed into an office. A desk faced the window. Bookshelves lined the walls. A comfortable chair sat in the corner. Mr. Wilson looked around, confused. What is this? Michael pointed to a framed document on the wall. That, he said, is the incorporation paperwork for the James Wilson Foundation. Mr. Wilson stepped closer, reading in disbelief. The foundation's mission, Michael explained, is to support school staff, janitors, cafeteria workers, bus drivers, maintenance workers, the people who make a difference in students' lives. Tears filled Mr. Wilson's eyes. If you want it, Michael added, there's a position waiting for you as the foundation's first executive director. After a long moment, Mr. Wilson nodded. Yes, he whispered. Martha clapped in delight. My husband, the foundation director. As they walked back inside, Mr. Wilson turned to Michael. You know, he said, my father once told me, you might just be mopping floors, but do it like you're changing the world. Because you never know whose life you might affect. He looked around, his heart full. I guess he was right. Michael smiled. He was. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like and subscribe. And let us know what part of Michael and Mr. Wilson's journey moved you the most. Share your thoughts in the comments below.